Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about some different types of triangles and how we would classify triangles by their side lengths first. So first we're going to take a look at the scalene triangle. Scalene triangle. Scalene triangle is a triangle with no congruent sides. So if you take a look at the diagram here, we have three different markings, which means all those sides have different lengths. So that triangle would be described as a scalene triangle. Isosceles triangle, I'm sure we've heard of that term before. Just as a refresher, an isosceles triangle is a triangle with two congruent sides. So if we look at the diagram here, we have a triangle where two of the sides are marked congruent. And an equilateral triangle, again, I'm sure you've heard of that before. Equa means equal and lateral means side, so equal sides or congruent sides. All three of the sides are congruent. So taking a look at the equilateral triangle here, we can see three sides are congruent. By the way, equilateral triangles are also always equiangular, meaning that all three angles have the same measure as well. So whenever you see a triangle marked with three sides congruent, you can also assume that the angles are all congruent as well. And in the isosceles triangle, the two angles that are opposite from the congruent sides, those angles are congruent as well. Only two of the angles, but they are congruent as well. Next, we're going to classify triangles by their angle measures. We just looked at classifying them by their side lengths. So now we're going to classify by angle measures. So here we have a right triangle. A right triangle is any triangle that contains one right angle. One right angle. So we can see we have that here. Now when you have a right triangle with one right angle, there's some other terminology we need to discuss, which you've learned before in Algebra 1, but this is a refresher. So the hypotenuse, that is the side that is opposite or across from the 90-degree angle. Side opposite the 90-degree angle or the right angle. And then the other two sides, which will be shorter in length than the hypotenuse length, those are called legs. So the two short sides are the legs, and the side that's opposite from the 90-degree angle, that is the hypotenuse. And this whole triangle is a right triangle because there's one right angle in it. Obtuse triangle. So an obtuse triangle is any triangle that contains one obtuse angle. Now notice it'll only ever have one. Can't have more than one obtuse angle in a triangle. So if there's one obtuse angle, it's called an obtuse triangle. So if I'm looking at this diagram here, this drawing, I can see this triangle, specifically this angle right here, that is larger than 90 degrees. And the way that I can tell that is I can see if I were to draw a straight up, that would be the L. That would be 90 degrees, and I can see it extends further than that 90, so that means that's an obtuse angle. So if it's an obtuse angle, then I can tell that it's an obtuse triangle as well. Acute triangle. An acute triangle is any triangle that contains all or all three acute angles. So if I take a look at this triangle, I can definitely see that this angle measures less than 90 degrees. Same thing here and same thing here. All three of those angles have measures that are less than 90 degrees. Therefore, those angles are acute, which means this is an acute triangle. Now, we just talked about classifying triangles by their sides and then also by their angles. Usually when we're classifying triangles, we classify them using both. Generally, we start with the angle first, and then we take a look at the side second. So if I look at this, this triangle here, I can see that I'm checking angles first. So I can see this angle, which is obtuse, and I can see all three sides have different lengths. Therefore, we would describe this as an obtuse scalene triangle. because of the all different side lengths and the obtuse angle. Next one. So I'm going with the angles first, so I can see all three of these angles have measures that are less than 90 degrees. So that means acute. And two of those sides are marked congruent, so that means isosceles. So this is an acute isosceles triangle. The next triangle, I can see that all three angle measures are less than 90 degrees, therefore acute. And all three sides are marked as congruent, which means equilateral. Okay. And remember, we also said that equilateral triangles are equiangular as well. All equilateral triangles will be acute. The only way to have all three angles have the same measure is if they're each measuring 60 degrees, and that's less than 90, which means that all equilateral triangles are acute. The next example. So looking at the right angle, I know that it's going to be a right triangle. And looking at the two sides that are marked congruent, I can see that is isosceles. So this is a right isosceles triangle.